Silence and Starsong is proud to present a reading of Cruel Waves by Cal Crucis. You can find this story and others like it in Volume 2, Issue 2 of Silence and Starsong Magazine. Check the link in the description. This story is read by Frank Theodat and Lauren Dorman.
The solar disk tore at his eyes. Relentless, head-throbbing. It was time to awake. Sitting up, surrounded with the flotsam of the wreck, piece by piece eaten by the waves, his skin was now blotched with the burns from that relentless lamp. He groaned, grabbing at his silky fuligen cloak. He sought darkness to hide him on that whitened beach. Shielding his head was a buckled hat, dark, and darker still were his trousers and leather boots. The Black Cloak lamented his attire, his condition, and began to contemplate the providence good or providence evil, that had brought him to this wretched island, this vile Caribbean teemed with thieves, cavaliers, traffickers in flesh. It was hard to judge which was worse. The clean waters hid the filth beneath, a new world that was an old strumpet reeking something far worse than old Europa. But here he was, in the name of his God and his republic. He bowed his naked head and took a knee to the name above. Thank thee, O Lord, I am safely ashore. He returned his hat and stood up, gazing around his alien surroundings. A beachy rim with that verdant exterior. It was a rock that ached with irrational appetite. It was not a world fit for men would not long remain men. It was no Babylon with mighty walls and towers, but it was no less wicked, be that wickedness latent. There were no courtiers or eunuchs or archiepiscopal trash, but something more profane lurked in the shadows. This the Black Cloak knew, even though he did not know how he knew. He stood up the rim of the whore's chalice and began his trek to find shelter. The surf continued to bark, wave after wave, reminding him of his thirst and his mission. He was here to wage war against the kingdom of Antichrist. The Black Cloak began to fiddle with his flintlock, filling powder and loading shot. He was here on behalf of the overheated imagination of one cracked secretary for foreign tongues. Having convinced the Lord Protector to send out one of his new model lieutenants, the Black Cloak was now in search of Cain's city, Atlantis, Plato's lying myth for the defense of the realm. The secretary had conjectured that its lost wealth and bounty was on the far side of the Atlantic, amidst lost Israelites and Welshmen. The first empire of men may be nothing more than a fable, but if it existed, it may contain untold treasures and lore that would help the Republic in its war against popery, especially the Stuart Jezebel and her Norman thralls. If the agents of Rome tyranny found these means, it may spell disaster for the saints. Thus the Black Cloak searched, beginning nowhere, in search of nothing. The beachy highway continued unabated, the sun's heat wrinkling his vision. The Black Cloak hoped he could find someone, or something, to help him in his quest, or at the very least get him off this rock. He began to reason with himself. Was it gold or silver that brought reformation to England? Did gilded rubbish, raped from the earth, give glory to God? What would this turn to mere carnal reason provide but misery? Was it pomp and mystery that won the field at Marston Moor? He spit the salty vapor from his mouth. That, combined with the heat, threatened to strangle his breathing. Mammon and Mars. These were the deities pleased with this fool's errand. Did these idols give victory in Ireland? That nightmare, that land darkened with disease of mind? The apish peasants enslaved to these ministers of Satan, forced to the death in that mausoleum, dripping honey-eyed poison in their ears, refusing all entreaties, warring, raging, provoking his fury as he stormed the walls, seeing her. A chill coursed through his son's smothered flesh. Shuddering, the scar on his chest ached. Still, the Black Cloak concluded it would be better to leave whatever long-lost vices to glitter alone in the dark. As he wandered, the heat continued to consume him, wasting him away to the limitless dust upon which he treaded. The interior was hardly welcoming, an impenetrable jungle wood, twisting, squeezing, oppressive in its vitality. But death was guaranteed if he remained on the sandy barricade. The waves continued to bay, rhythmic in their hunger, until a raspy voice from behind punctured the noise. "Who are thee, stranger? How cometh thee to end up in this here island?" "Sir, I search—"
"What's that? Thou art some schemer. They all be schemers. I don't care for the trade, whatever trade it be. But I, humble servant for my master. Come, whatever thy business be, I take thee to the Fey Queen. Follow. Time be ebbing fast."
His rude speech matched his corruption, prematurely graying, jaunty with yellow teeth. He gripped an empty bottle and sauntered in his ripened flaxen apparel. This wastrel exuded effervescent decay, almost if he had been born dead. He stunk with rot, speaking with the toothless whistle. He staggered on ahead, leaving the Black Cloak to follow. As he continued around the curve of the island, the wastrel continued to mutter to himself, scratching a flea-bitten head with leathery claws. As the Fey Queen came into sight, a cyclopean hovel of rogue-hue stones, mismatched decorum, the wastrel babbled louder, this time with rage.
"And so it is, and so it is, here, and so it is, ye damned devil, ye rum devil, and so it is."
As they approached, the walls revealed an ugly smattering of pastel colors, pinkish and bluish hues, plastered haphazardly, faded and ugly. A facade of rotted wood formed a portico with two Doric columns standing watch. To the sides and behind the entrance were many fields, weedy and wasted. All races labored side by side, communicating in a babel of tongues, indifferent to their incoherence. What was said in English was identical to the wastrel. Their labor consisted in hacking at the dirt, digging and filling, without any agronomic sense. Vacant eyes tending a vacant lot, they worked on this haunted domain seated on the Atlantic rim. A pile of rotting fish sat in the shade, heaped up and vile. No birds seemed interested in this quarry. The wastrel began to peel off, but not before gesturing towards the threshold. He returned to the shore. As the Black Cloak approached the entrance, a poor Indio arrayed in misfitted garments of a courtier appeared from within, and with a stroke of the hand beckoned the new guest inside. The two crossed the threshold into a deathly cold, more cryptic than hearth, somehow immune to the sun's heat. A wet chill hung in the air. The servant sped off, leaving the Black Cloak to stand alone in the vestibule. There were no doors, but several darkened openings, leading God knows where. Suddenly a clang of bells erupted throughout the estate, erratically and harsh. The Black Cloak's head began to throb. His scar ached, but before this continued to the point of imbecile annoyance, the bells all ceased, and a man in a filthy blue buff coat appeared on his left, accompanied by a woolly-head domestic. Wordless, they bowed to the new guest, the servant waddling back into the dark of the house, while the gentleman, with a twinkle in his eye, smiled at the Black Cloak. Gouty and gripping a staff that was topped with a bronze shell, he gestured for his guest to follow him further inside. The Black Cloak followed and discovered a modest dining hall, possessing a polished stone slab, That obviously served as a table. Upon it was a spread of modest fare. A few hunks of rotted wood had been pressed into the service of chairs, as if their maker did not quite understand this custom and had to adjust for proper eating. 3 windows were carved out of the rocky interior, each installed with modern glass as windows, a strange and awkward blend. All around the table stood what presumably was a kitchen staff that had sped to place out food, mostly inedible, to feed their new guest. Some wormy meat sat beside green cheese and raw flesh. There was also some stale bread. The gentleman plopped into a seat, gesturing the Black Cloak to do the same. He was thirsty, as the gentleman began something of a pitch. "Ah, that scar on your chest." The foxy face, prematurely aged, twisted his auburn whiskers as he cocked his head awkwardly, a puppet with loose wire. "It's fresh, it's fresh. Did you earn it?" "At Drogheda, sir." The truth struck in his throat along with the salt. Yes, wherever. No doubt that scar runs far deeper than mere flesh. I fought too. I fought for the king, yes, in service of his honor at Edgehill. But now it is of no matter. Be not afraid. I had better business to attend, and now so do you, boy." He grinned as he gestured to the dilapidated grandeur. "Here to serve the old ones of the Fey Queen." He gestured to the dilapidated grandeur. "No, sir. I came in search of—" The gentleman's eyes laughed mirthlessly. "In search of treasure? Of course, boy. But what business be that to thee?" Flakes of ashy skin fell as he spoke. "This house, boy, be the treasure thee seek. I know thee, boy, I know the hate in thy heart, that hate that put thee in service to that precisionous idol." The Black Cloak sat silent, grim. "Thou art here for a purpose. To join this house, receive the kingdom, and the power, and the glory." The gentleman stopped as he noticed the Black Cloak gripped his abdomen in pain. His head throbbed, his scar ached. He gripped his pistol tighter, looked up at those vacant, hungry eyes, and gummy grin. "Sick of the old salt and sea, eh, boy? We all are. Yet knock, and thou findest. Come, take a drink." Receiving the goblet of port from his host and thrusting him above, the Black Cloak took a sip, wetting his blistered lips. He removed his hat, revealing the close crop of the Roundhead's cut, a sign of his piety and his politics. Grabbing at the hunk of that crusty bread, he bit into it as his host continued. "As I told thee, boy, do not fear me. I was for Charlie and his right, but it matters not. It's no good. What am I about, boy, is this old faith. No, not that Romish trash. A better kind of idolatry, older than thy scriptures, older than bleeding messiahs. These be those who made earth from the bones of their parents. Now, boy, thou hast to choose. Wilt thou pledge fealty to the gods of this house?" The Black Cloak paused his chewing, gripped his pistol more tightly than ever. He sat in silence. "Answer me, boy. I know thy zeal, be it ever so misguided. Dost thou not seek a greater baptism, not of fire, temporary and fleeting, but of everlasting light? Dost thou wish to live forever in the god of the storm? Tempt not the Lord thy God." "Idiot, clown, art thou serious?" The Black Cloak heard the shuffle of clumsy feet behind the dark tapestry. Bronze and massive, the toes comforted one another in eager expectation, like a child in a game of hide-and-seek, waiting to emerge. A repressed gibber escaped before returning to silence.
The Black Cloak turned back to the gentleman. "Insolent! And so—"
The clang of bells began once again, with the servant breathlessly announcing new guests. 3 plump Franks entered the hall, doffing their hats, bowing low before their host. They eyed hatefully this gaunt Puritan, returning their gaze through hazel determination, but soon turned and bowed to their host. Their leather gloves spoke of great valor and greater violence, plunder and pillage as a vocation. They were from any court that would have them.
"Monsieur, nous sommes le fils du roi. We beseech thee for respite in these trying times. We are in search of—"
"Booty, mon ami."
"Oui, monsieur."
"Dost thou have any scars?"
We have campaigned and—"
"Dost thou fill thy heart with worshipful love for thy gods below, thy rightful masters?"
"Quick!"
Startled at his strange request, consulting with one another with quick glances, the 3 men unsheathed their swords, panicked, backing slowly out of the hall, the gentleman's head cocked to the other side, his mouth agape.
"And so it is."
It was already over. A massive hulk, more beast than man, naked and bronze, flew from the drapery, cleaving the first Frenchman's head with a stone hatchet, its single carmine gem sparkling in the massacre. Falling to his knees, spinning in his slaughterous dance, the giant slithered in between the other 2 adventurers, grabbing each other by the throat as he had shifted his axe to sit between his teeth. Filed into fangs and happy, he strangled and shook the 2 men, who violently slashed at their attacker. Choking, gurgling, they soon went limp as 2 distinct cracks signaled their end. Their limp bodies dropped to the floor, dusty and greedily drunk from the blood that had already begun to pool. The giant bowed to the gentleman, who reciprocated. Before disappearing behind the veil once more, the visible toes began to fidget once more with excitement. In the flash of this combat, the Black Cloak had bolted from his seat and alternated his barrel between his host and this beast. As if none of this had happened, the gentleman's head jerked straight up before falling back into its usual tilt. His composure reset, and he began again, like an amateur stagehand losing his line. "Ah, that scar on your chest. Thou hast changed thy mind? No matter. And so it is." Predictably, the drape burst open once more, hatchet raised to claim a scalp, but the crack of gunpowder drove him back. The ball had entered the center of the giant's chest, hurling him back to the wall of this hiding-place. He howled and screamed and laughed, filling the room with the stench of his breath, sulphurous and rotten. He fingered his wound, intrigued at the new experience, smearing the ichor around on his chest. The giant had turned his gaze back to the Black Cloak. But he had lost his moment in the novelty. The Black Cloak had jumped across the table and rolled through the window, shattering the pane. He had darted towards the jungle heart of the island. All those vacant eyes, those mindless serfs, now turned with rage to heed their master's bellow. His hat flew from his head, exposing a chestnut mop as the mob chased him, brandishing spades and hoes into the woods. The Black Cloak had speed for the moment, but the hand of a tree provided a different answer. Before he got far into the brush, the Black Cloak was snagged, yanking him backwards over a densely covered burrow. His head slammed against the mossy trunk, dropping him into a bed of leaves and vines. His head throbbed, his chest ached. The cry of the hunting party lit up in every direction. He thirsted as darkness swallowed him. The Black Cloak awoke in the cold rays of that lesser lamp. The dead of night had, however, transformed this militia of peasants into something else. The cry of hunt had given to the solemnity of chant. The Black Cloak bowed his head. "Strengthen thou me." Opening his eyes and spying his foes, he saw a procession to the beat of dithyramb. Thunder rolled in the distance of some far ocean storm. Lines of torches dotted the fields, some wielding tom-toms to carry the rhythm. In a barbarous Latin, they chanted Dominus to intersperse their Dionysic rite. Then the giant appeared before them, robed in purple toga, hairless and oily. He clapped his hands to the responsive chant. Another burst of thunder shook the sky. The clopping of horses added another sound to the ceremony, pulling a cart with a rusted cage. Inside sat a porcelain waif, wine-dark hair waving down her back. As the cage approached the celebrant, she stood revealing her Amazonian dimensions. Imperious and noble, she stood tall towards her captors, violet eyes flashing hatred. Her arms covered her full breasts, an unpossessed maid quiet in her dignity. Yet she did not remain silent long, visibly irate at the idiot chanting and the smiling giant. She lashed him, as only a matron could, speaking down to some dim-witted child in some forgotten guttural tongue. The giant stood at his feet, almost bashful. But this embarrassment gave way to renewed confidence. He disrobed and barked back at the lady in what sounded the same language. He snapped his fingers as one of the cultists approached. Removing his hood, the gentleman appeared, though even more withered than before. Without pomp, the giant grabbed his axe, removed the head of his slave, and dangled the head before the cage's door. After the blood covered the bars, the door creaked open, leaving her exposed. Raising his fist to the sky in a new chant, the ceremony continued in an unintelligible croaking. The thunder boomed once more, interspersing the shouts and the drums. The giant grabbed her head and threw her down in the mud. She struggled to stand, but he forced her head down. The chants continued, the drums boomed, the thunder cracked. She flailed, her bruised legs kicking, pearl skin marbled through torment. The chants, the drums, the thunder. He felt his blood cold as he buried his face in his black cloak. Then the shrieking began. Darkness drank him once more. He awoke to the sound of English. And so it is, and so it is. They processed with white stallions, pulling the cage once more, the battered lady holding her knees to her chest. Creeping from his hole, the Black Cloak followed them to the beach, where they entered a sea-soaked cave. Into the cleft they went, the Black Cloak trailing them and hiding behind a few misplaced boulders along the shore. He prayed with his hands as he refilled the powder in his gun and rammed another ball down the barrel. As the acolytes returned to their estate, horse in tow, the Black Cloak entered the shadowy cavern, not searching long before the cage was visible. Its bars were adamantine and ruined, eaten through rust but unshakable. Inscriptions from some vile sorcery lined the door, which was locked shut with a bronze-inscribed lock. The thunder outside had subsided, leaving only the whining of the waves. His foot tapped a pebble, breaking the sobs with wrath. There stood Black Cloak, his pale chest exposed. She smiled, staring over her shoulder at him. Standing Calabagothic, Black Cloak blushed.
"Hail, Saxon! I can speak thy tongue, of course. Who are you? How did thee find this my domain?"
Her foot began to tap out her contemplation, lowering her chin, hiding her face and leaving only raven strands cascading down, revealing thighs streaked with emerald. The Black Cloak remained silent, regaining his composure after a petition for his heart. Satisfied with her thought, her foot stopped as she lifted her head to face him once more.
Dost thou think thee capable of freeing me? Dost thou even know who I am?
Yes.
Ha ha! Bold thou art. This nightmare, this inversion of our order must come to a close. No longer is this the hour of the dog, that stupid, insolent beast, thinking him like his father.
She paused and let out a sigh.
That monster was my son.
The Black Cloak remained silent.
So thou shalt free me. How?
By Christ. She spat, but he persisted. By Christ, I will find a way. She was puzzled by his determination, an eyebrow raised in both hope and contempt.
Dost thou not see thy lock and know the key? Blood, Galilean, and not thine own.
Black Cloak began to search for an adequate stone to smash the lock, weighty and large, enough to crack through the rust, but everything turned to dust in his hand. It was as if the earth revolted against his task. She grew impatient, grit her teeth, and masked with drollery.
So, idiot.
She let loose a cackle that disguised her frustration and eagerness to escape her enthrallment. She bit her lip, impatient, a green streaming dripping down her colorless mouth. The Black Cloak, inspired, turned to her face, leveling his gun at the locks. She turned her head back, baring her chin to cover her eyes. He took his aim and fired.
Thou fool!
But soon she choked back her words. The ball had blown the lock clear off the cage, shattering into 4 neat pieces on damp cave floor. She cackled again, this time with real glee and anticipation.
Remarkable, thou fool thou art, Galilean. It is time to settle accounts with that abomination and bring him to justice, as thy master has clearly ordainest for his treachery.
She now turned her face to the Black Cloak, her nearly translucent skin waxing in the moonlight. Fire burned in her eyes as she stepped out of her confinement.
This day he shall die. He shall die. He shall die.
Her fit began to smash again and again into the stone, squashing an imagined bug.
He shall die and return what he hath stolen. He shall submit. He shall submit. He shall submit.
Rage had consumed her as she slammed again and again her marbled heel repeatedly against the stone. Her chest heaved and bounced as she focused upon her mock subjugation. Her voice rattled until she regained her sense of self. She once again covered her bosom with her lithe arms, shaking with the wrath to come. She stared through the Black Cloak to the task at hand.
Let us end this, Galilean.
Following her giant strides out of the cave and towards the fields of her usurper's palace, Black Cloak gripped his pistol tight. His scar ached. To win the attention of her foe against the waning twilight, a series of guttural, abnormal curses shattered the night silence. Thunder again sounded upon the ocean. The litany of abuse carried on, louder and louder, until the sound of footsteps, clomping and confused, began to fill the air. The stars shook as she, hands on her hips, unconcerned of her bouncing appearance, reveled in what could only be ridicule and contempt. Soon the slave mob, half changed from their cultic attire, assumed the position of an entourage, some carrying drums and some tools. The giant soon appeared disturbed and enraged. The two abused one another in exchange for preternatural insults. The Black Cloak rammed a ball down the barrel. The acolytes joined in to improve the status of their master. The thunder increased in frequency as a streak of lightning crossed the cloudless sky, equally matched, or so it seemed. The lady ceased her growls. She then turned down at her champion.
See these vile wretches, these disgusting beasts of mire and mud. Thou understandest, Galilean. I spy it in thy eyes. This wretch must be vomited from this land. This and this alone stand between us, strange as it may be.
The Black Cloak nodded and turned away from her, kneeling down silently. After the moment he stood once more and faced his foe. Laughter exploded from her throat, followed by a mocking string of guttural intonations. The giant grunted and huffed, cackling his fanged teeth. Naked, he gripped his axe between his teeth and stared at his prey. The Black Cloak readied himself, but he felt the pain in his bowels once more. He bent over in pain to the sound of a guffaw. As he regained his standing, he saw her glare.
Do not disappoint me, even if it be for his sake.
She gestured up to the spin of her finger, rolling his eyes. She once more folded her arms and stared towards the ocean, away from this profane duel. The giant smiled, beginning the combat by rushing forward on all fours. Lightning struck the trees, but playfully. In that burst, the giant had already closed the gap. The flame of pride in his porphyric eyes. He sprung up before the Black Cloak, who, disoriented, jumped backwards, tripping over his cape. What was mortal combat was now, it seemed, a game of peekaboo. As the Black Cloak stood once more, the giant had turned around to bow before his adoring fans. They all laughed, while the lady let loose an audible groan. The giant turned back to his opponent, who had leveled his gun. The hammer clicked before he could readjust. The giant had played the same move, spooking the Black Cloak backwards, falling over a pebble that caught his boot. Once more the crowd roared. The lady, teeth clenched, forced out her displeasure.
Get up! Get up! Finish this, Galilean! Dawn is almost here!
The Black Cloak had reached for his powder, but now his enemy took a different tactic of entertainment. Now the giant began to stumble and wobble this way and then that way, a snaky dance that imbalanced the Black Cloak. His eyes confused, following the dance of footsteps, all leading to, once more, jumping before him. This time, however, he had brandished his axe, chopping at the Black Cloak's head, dropping down and rolling backwards, clumsily falling over more stones. The crowd continued to howl. A few strands of hair decorated the field. In the dodge, he had lost his pistol in the dirt. The giant knew the contest was over. But he was Caesar in Herculean costume, a gladiator performing for hungry plebs. So this performance continued. The barbarized refrain of Dominus filled the air as the first rosy fingers of dawn began to pierce the sky. Again the giant hacked, and again the Black Cloak dodged. The game was getting tiring. After a dozen of near misses, the Black Cloak had stepped over a more jagged stone, twisting his ankle in the fall. The laughter subsided, for the sport had moved to sacrifice. The lady continued to look away towards the sea, grimaced. The giant now would relish the meal, throwing down his axe, planning to tear the Black Cloak limb from limb, each to be savored in turn. The Black Cloak, however, had stumbled over his pistol and held it by the barrel. Closing his eyes, moving his lips wordlessly, he stood waiting. The sheep was ready for the slaughter, and the giant lunged at him, only to receive the wooden butt smashing against his nose. The giant howled and howled, hopping between feet, sobbing from this new pain. Inattentive, covering his face, it was now the giant's time to stumble over the stony field, smashing his face against the same sharpened rock. He moaned and cried as his acolytes now joined in the lament. The The Black Cloak approached his massive stone axe, lifted it up, and moved back to the defeated Titan. A sharp breeze cut across the island, throwing the lady's hair back. Grimace now turned to smile, still facing away from the unfolding judgment. With a grunt, the Black Cloak brought the edge down, spraying his chest with a gush of verdant. The lifeless head stared upwards, eyes fluttering, mouth twitching with some ineffable curses or prayers to gods above or below. The thunder had ceased. Whipping around and striding towards her champion, she lifted his arms up. Her face shone pink in the light. Bending toward to plant a kiss, the Black Cloak blushed and shuddered, cold and hot in turn. In girlish excitement, she then turned on the mob of defeated slaves, slashing their throats with her pointed nails. Cackling and hacking, she put an end to this uprising. The soil guzzled the carrion as she with speed disemboweled her sacrifices, piling them upon the shore, letting the waves lick up her offering. Then she grabbed the corpse of the giant, hurling it on top. Then, whirling and giggling, she danced with his head, as girl dances with her dolls. She kissed it on the lips before tossing it into the murderous pipe. Once more she stared off into the sea, intoning reverently for her master abroad. The Black Cloak watched her in silence as day began to take his throne. She threw her head back with a twisted smile and opened her mouth as if to speak, but the Black Cloak cut her off. "By Christ, get thee hence!" Her smile turned into a coy frown, spitting into the sand. She turned back to the waves, which revealed now an ancient tortoise, stinking of volcanic depth. Its eyes were dull and uncaring. It crawled onto the beach and began to feed upon the carnage, tearing flesh from bone, then marrow from rind. Soon nothing was left. Uninterested or unaware of the Black Cloak, he then bellowed an ancient croak to conclude the rite. The lady then mounted his ridged shell, waving farewell to the Black Cloak, who lowered his head towards the sand in bashful disdain. As he lifted his head, the tortoise and his mate sailed off into the distance, disappearing in the rays of the sun, before submerging into the deep. Now she was gone, and now he was alone. The Black Cloak hobbled back to the stone vault. The sun still waxed hot as the stone hall remained frozen. Soon he sat down once more at the stone table, grabbing again the stale crust and taking up his cup of port. He closed his eyes to offer his unspoken petition. He ate and drank. Tomorrow he would build a raft and leave this god-forsaken island. But today he would praise the Lord.